Tonight, once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Brian Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latest gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Fry, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
All right. So the Commonwealth just provided the court with information that causes me grave concern. The implications of that information may have profound effects on this defense and defense counsel. So for that reason, I'm going to suspend today so that when we meet again to address these issues, all affected will be appropriately prepared.
There you go. Is anybody really surprised? To be honest, let's be honest, guys. Welcome back to the show. Welcome to DT. I'm Daniel. Good to see everybody here. I do have a special guest in the background, waiting to see when he's ready to rock and roll so I can bring him on. But there was a hearing today that got suspended a little bit early, and the Karen Reed case. And I mean, I was shocked. I'll be honest. I was shocked about this information that had popped up. It surprised me. You know, I wasn't expecting something like this to come out, but at the end of the day, when I was getting bombarded by a bunch of questions when it comes to this case, referencing, you know, the crash, recreation, I apologize. The, you know, how ARCCA was out there independent, this, that, and the third, said that there was no accident. And me, as a person who was former law enforcement, who has actually been out there and what's the word I'm looking for? Investigated. There we go. So somebody who's investigated accidents, fatality accidents, pedestrian accidents. I've seen a lot of different things and a lot of different ways that a person has been injured in a lot of different ways, and not just with vehicle accidents, but with just normal or regular. I don't even want to say regular or normal, just like, you know, fatalities that occur. Like I've talked about how a person being pushed to the ground, hit their head in the wrong way, has lost their life. You know, I've seen where a person get hit by a vehicle, you know, and have little to no injuries and survive. I mean, there's so many different things that have come back and forth when it comes to that. To go in there and say, without a shadow of a doubt, that this was not from that, I was a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? I thought it was a little bit troublesome. I was like, because the injuries that were there, and based on the elements that we know of, you know, I mean, it was a freezing night, so the ground would have been frozen. It was snowing. There was snow. There was fresh snow on the ground, so that also would have, you know, had two different types of two different types of environments for the body to land in, right? So the fresh snow would have been softer. However, depending on how hard you're hitting and how thick that snow is at the time of the impact, you know, frozen ground, if it's been frozen for a while, it's like hitting concrete. And so for somebody to have the injuries that he had, you know, it was, you know, obviously I was not surprised that people were questioning how this occurred. To me, it looks like a side swipe, and the guy just landed and hit his head. He was intoxicated. He probably, maybe potentially could have survived had maybe he gotten some medical attention right away. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I've seen people get hit with similar lacerations. I can't tell you, you know, the inside stuff, like how that goes. But I like as far as the brain or anything like that. But I've seen lacerations of that size before, and somebody survive. So give me a thumbs up if you're ready to go. Down at the bottom. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, because I know you're doing your show as well. It looks like you're still talking. Looks like you're still talking. But all righty. So let's see. Let's pull this up. So that was the judge shaking. Let me see how I'm going to do this with my buddy here. All right. So I pull him up. I think he'll just be already talking on his show. Let me check what's going on his side of things real quick. He's on his show is already as well. Let's see. And we're going to talk about this case. We're going to talk about the Bryan Kohberger case as well. Yeah, I see him still live on his. All righty. Okay, so let's pull this up. This is from the Daily Mail. This says here that the judge presiding over the high-profile case in the Karen Reed murder trial of Karen Reed, a Boston woman accused of killing her cop boyfriend, dramatically ended proceedings yesterday with a shaky courtroom outburst. Judge Beverly Keenan visibly trembled, citing evidence has changed everything. And basically what it was the fact that in the first trial, apparently ARCCA was claiming to be completely independent, not having anything to do with either side, being hired on by the government. And there were some certain rules that had to be followed. One of those rules was that they weren't going to be able to, neither side was going to be able to question ARCCA about certain things. They weren't going to be paid for anything. I believe I read somewhere, heard somewhere that the defense was in charge of, well, I don't know. You know what? I'll ask Kevin when he comes on. What do you call it? They weren't supposed to be asking them any questions, and they're in here. And come to find out, there's some emails that came out that implicate that the Alan Jackson was asking questions, and they were going through some of the tactics between the defense and what should be said, what couldn't be said, and that there was a $23,950 tab or so that was paid by the defense, and I think that was for room and board or whatever. But I will say this, as a person who has worked as a 1099 contractor, self-employed, I've been self-employed for a while. As a person who is self-employed and having other jobs in the past, room and board is part of payment. It is. Now, different states are different. So here in Texas, room and board would be considered payment for this. I'm interested in seeing how this is going to end up coming out. This should be let's see, because I know there's a lot of people that are thinking that maybe perhaps Alan Jackson's going to be removed from the defense team. And although I think that would make things take a while, if it was in fact something that he did do wrong, maybe that's the right thing to do. Apparently, I'm not even sure he's licensed or is able to. I know that there's some kind of special reasoning behind how he can be representing Karen Reed in the state that he's not. I don't know. I think the term is licensed, I guess. Let's see. All righty. Let's see. And we're ready. So without further ado, we got my buddy coming up here. Kevin, what's going on, my man? How's it going?
Hey, Daniel, how you feeling? And I hope you don't mind. I hope you don't have a prohibition against this, but I'm going to do a rare thing and open a beer on your show. Is that all right?
Go ahead. We used to be called the Drunk Turkey Show for a reason. I would join you. However, I am still on pain medication, and I don't think that would work.
No, probably not. You want to see some ID? I'm old enough.
I trust you, my man. I trust you. So, welcome to the show. It was an interesting court yesterday, trial hearing yesterday. I caught most of it but I was going through some doctor's appointments. I did go back and listen to it. It sounded pretty cut and dry there. I mean, it sounds like there may have been a lot more to ARCCA and their involvement with the defense team than initially thought. What was your first thought when you heard this development, that one, there was communication between the defense team about tactics between them and ARCCA, and two, that there is a almost $24,000 bill covered by the defense team?
Man, there were so many things to parse here, and there were so many things that were bombshells that it was just, I think I said something on my show, like this has now become the biggest case ever. And people are like, no, OJ. I'm like, no, I get it. There've been more popular cases. But just the twists and turns of this case, it just never stop. And they're just starting because there seems to be powerful evidence of federal corruption here. And we're just getting started on getting to the bottom of it. But so the ARCCA guys, so just one thing that came out too, Daniel, is that so the protective, the feds had been done this investigation, grand jury, all this stuff into the witnesses based on Karen Reed going into their office and saying there's a conspiracy here. You got to investigate it. And they convinced him. And there's been a whole lot of inappropriate, improper communication between the feds and Karen's team. But so eventually the Norfolk County DA and then Karen's team filed a joint motion to the feds. We need any material evidence. Now the feds are required. We've all heard of Brady material. Anything that the feds have that, as long as it's requested, that could be exculpatory to somebody standing trial. So a defendant, they have no choice. They have to turn it over before that person faces trial. So they put together a 3,000-page file on that. And before they turned it over, they made both sides, Karen's side and the prosecution, sign a protective order. It's basic among the things, keeping them to secrecy, not leaking any of that and stuff like that. Well, part of that was they were not allowed to hire the ARCCA guys or any of the other experts that the feds used. So, and this came out a lot. Brennan talked about it yesterday. So it was the first time we really thought about it. But if you go back and look at the trial last year or the voir dire, you heard Yannetti and Alan Jackson and Adam Lally all talking about similar things. And so the defense team, nor the prosecution, they were not allowed to hire the ARCCA guys. They were not allowed to consult them. They were not allowed to question them about their collusions. And they certainly weren't allowed to prep them for testimony. They had, they go in, they were supposed to go in dark and not know anything about what these guys had. And then they were supposed to, because they were presented to us as though they were independent and they're going to present their conclusions in court. In theory, they could have been inculpatory for Karen. We all knew they wouldn't be, but what we learned yesterday was that at the very least, one of the ARCCA guys, Dr. Wolf, was communicating with Alan Jackson of the defense team, and that's a violation. They were preparing. So Wolf was even given advice about how the prosecution should be handled. Do you want me to not talk about this, or should we avoid this? I mean, they were clearly breaking the rules that and the agreement that was signed. And Alan Jackson, I'm sure, assumed that most of those conversations were over the phone and it would never come out. But Dr. Wolf referenced him in an email. And I'm sure Jackson was like, I hope that never sees the light of day. But it did see the light of day. Now, there was a little confusion because the prosecutor yesterday, Hank Brennan, mistakenly said that the feds revealed those messages, but the feds could not have. They wouldn't have messages between Karen's defense and the ARCCA guys. And then he corrected it after the break to say, no, Alan Jackson had just turned those over a week ago. But why would Alan Jackson suddenly turn them over? Well, what seems to have happened is that Hank Brennan sent a very thorough motion compelling the ARCCA guys to give away any communications they've had throughout this with the defense, with the feds. Now, the ARCCA guys are not allowed to release those communications with the feds unless the feds give permission, and they didn't. But I'm sure Dr. Wolf went to the lawyers and said, what do I do here? I got these emails with Alan Jackson. And I'm sure those lawyers said, dude, if you don't give them over, you're in legal jeopardy. If that ever gets discovered, you're in big trouble. So I think that what happened was, just guessing here, that Dr. Wolf, who is clearly a partisan witness on the side of the defense, called up Alan Jackson and said, hey, buddy, heads up. I have to turn these over, so you might want to get ahead of it. So I think Alan Jackson got ahead of it, and he turned them in just last week.
If he turned them in and he was aware of it and he got the heads up and all these things, and this drops down the way it does, wouldn't you expect some sort of like objection or anything at the end once it was dropped down by the prosecution that, hey, we have this, this is going on? Why stay completely silent? I mean, all of her attorneys were completely silent at that point.
Yeah,
That to me spoke a lot, spoke volumes about the how grave and the nature of this is.
yeah.
And
And you're using the judge's word.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, when they didn't say anything and they just let that go and not put in a word and not even argue or even, I know she suspended it for a week.
Yeah.
And then for this to be out there just kind of lingering for a whole week tells me a couple of things, though. It probably also tells me that Alan Jackson, there may be more, that Alan Jackson doesn't know exactly how much more.
Yep.
Oh,
that's a good point.
That the prosecution could be aware of, that if he were to say something then,
that's an outstanding point. Yeah.
could open up a huge can of worms for himself. So in that scenario, it may be best to stay quiet. Those are the two things that kind of popped into my mind when they didn't say anything. I was like, wow, they're just going to let that hang out there for an entire week. I mean,
wow,
the optics aren't there.
That's really insightful and extra impressive given that you're on pain meds. But that's that's really insightful. You're right. I didn't hear any. I didn't think of that. And I haven't heard anybody discussing that. And so, could that be a reason? That's very logical why he didn't stand up, because you would think, right? He might say, Your Honor, I want a chance to defend myself because I've just been smeared in public, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but he doesn't know yet what he doesn't know. So that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I wonder if there's more to it. And if so, I know this is a high profile case and it's gone long enough and there's been a mistrial, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting taken off of her defense team, even though he is the main defense attorney. It is, I mean, I don't know. I don't see another route here. You have an attorney here who basically purged himself in trial.
It's such a big move because if you take away her attorney, now I don't doubt that if they wanted to, they could go on.
Right.
But they presumably prefer to have a postponement. And so they will make that argument and the judge will have to grant it because he's a primary defense lawyer for them. So you'll get a long postponement, I would think. And then, the repercussions for Alan Jackson, that could he be brought before the bar in California? Would this make it almost impossible for him to ever appear like this in another state outside California? And then finally, I don't know, would this somehow be a basis for reversal on appeal down the road? I mean, so many issues. And I just think the judge is going to be extremely reluctant to go down that road.
Yeah, I mean, it is a, because let's just say that they keep him on here. Now the only case I'm ever familiar that had something similar to this had happened was with the Richard Allen case, where the defense released pictures of the crime scene. And those attorneys were taken off and then eventually put back on.
Yeah.
I would have,
right.
Yeah, I would have assumed that's probably more grave and more extreme than what this would be in this scenario.
Right. Although those lawyers would never prove to be knowledgeable, aware of that release of those images, although they have been warned. I guess if I understand it right, if I remember, Daniel, they were warned prior to that about having a leaky office. And so their violation was having not that they were aware or released those things on purpose, but that they didn't respond properly to the leaks. Am I remembering that correctly? That's how I remember it anyways.
I know that there was it was due to a leaky area, but I don't know if they had any pre-form warnings. They may have. I wasn't into the creases of that case either, like I am, like with, for instance,
Yeah.
the Bryan Kohberger case. But I know with that case they ended up putting them back on. But the thought was that if found guilty, and let's just put this in preference here with Karen Reed, if found guilty, can she appeal, saying something to the effect like, ineffective counsel? They did something to this effect where now this is out there and that makes Karen look guilty.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? It's you make a good point there too. So Karen's going to try it either way. She's going to try to have her cake and eat it too. So if the judge does not dismiss Alan Jackson and she is found guilty, she will appeal down the road based on ineffective counsel. However, if the judge takes away, she's going to appeal based on the fact that her main attorney was removed, her attorney of choice. So she's going to appeal no matter what, but that's par for the course, I guess, right? So it's up to but this is why the judge has to make sure that everything is done as close to. I'm going to bet that this week she's consulting experts in the court of the SJC and contacts. She's worried about all these issues, and that may even be part of the reason that probably is the main reason. I know she was trembling yesterday. And people say, oh, she closed court because she was having a meltdown. No, I think that she needed to consult people. I don't know. Do you believe that, or is that plausible?
I mean, I definitely think that that's probably what it was. I don't think you want to make a decision harshly. And then I think that the reason why that she canceled the remaining portions could be because there could be a possibility that Alan Jackson's not a part of the team. I mean, isn't he the one that's possibly not going to be able to make it? And she said, it's okay, you can be on Zoom.
Yeah.
It was him, right?
Yes. Yep.
I mean, that's not a good sign either. Like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, you don't have to show up. That's never been the best sign there. But I was listening to a couple of different places that brought up, the initial trial to go through some of the things that was said. And I believe it was Yannetti who had said something to the effect like, have we ever spoken? Maybe Jackson also, but wasn't it also the other lawyer who also said, have we ever had any conversation prior to this or anything like that outside of?
Yannetti said something similar to that too. Yeah, I've seen a clip of that today. Yeah.
And so could both of these guys be in some sort of trouble?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And isn't Yannetti like the reason why Alan Jackson can be her lawyer?
Right. He's the Massachusetts lawyer, and they're working under him. I believe Little's out of state, but we know Alan Jackson is. We know Alessi is out of state. I don't know where this guy Bettero's from, but I think I think he might be New York too. So they might be all out of state. So yeah, they're all working under Yannetti.
Yeah. It's this one's a dumpster. What all was supposed to be talked about today?
What was supposed to be talked? Oh, and you mean after that, in the motions after that?
Yeah. What was everything? What did they postpone?
Well, there was I'm not sure of all of it, and I've been so busy trying to finish up a book, but there was a motion for sanctions was going to be discussed. The motion, I think the defense motion for sanctions. No, I'm sorry. There was a motion for there was a motion for sanctions by the prosecution. I get confused because the defense has a motion that's going to be coming up for dismissal, and then the prosecution has a rebuttal for that. But I believe there was a motion for sanctions yesterday, and this half a beer has made me forget that what the sanctions were based on. But there was something I was going to mention to you that was so one of the things that, and you are very practical and logical and common sense, and this is what I'm not seeing in the general public. So I was on, which is a very different thing than intelligence. There are really, really intelligent people that lack this kind of street smarts, common sense. All right, and so we got so many people. I went on the show, Brother Counsel's show. He's a lawyer, a few weeks ago, and he said he didn't want to hear anything about the prosecution's evidence. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to weigh it. He didn't factor in. To him, the ARCCA guys are science. with a capital S. He called it like science. I'm like, what? Like the Oracle of Delphi? What does that mean? And he said they're independent. And they concluded that John was not struck by a vehicle. And what I tried to explain to him is they are not independent. And I don't even think there really is such thing as an independent expert. Everybody leans one way or the other. In this case, it's weird because they were hired by the feds, but the feds were leaning one way. So what I explained to him is you need to look at all of the evidence. And in fact, the example I gave him, I said, was had there been video that emerged that showed the accident, you would still have the ARCCA guys report. It would still be the same, but you would look at that and say, oh, wow, this video. So the ARCCA guys are wrong. But we have evidence that is not video, but is just as powerful. It's just as compelling. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, these people they look at ARCCA, that's science. They lack the common sense to understand that it's somewhat impossible to find a truly independent witness. And that's what I argued then. And my impression was these ARCCA guys, these scientists, were for whatever reason on the side of the defense. The U.S. Attorney's Office is whatever reason on the side of the defense. We hopefully will get to the bottom of that someday. But I don't understand why people don't have that common sense understanding that that's how it works, and they just don't even want to look at the rest of the evidence. I don't get that.
I mean, even if there was, so nobody's perfect, right? So even if it was a completely independent, witness, I don't think that they would be batting 100, just like anybody else. Nobody's going to bat 100, right? And so I do give them some, room for error and to be wrong in the situation. As far as like them being completely science and now knowing that they've gotten paid and they've cooperated or they've had some sort of, conversation about tactics with the defense. I mean, it's a paid expert. I mean, it's what it sounds like. And when you have a paid expert, there's a biasness there behind it. There's reasoning and meaning behind it. You know, at the end of the day, that expert wants to get paid again.
Right. And the way to do that is to help your client.
Exactly. I mean, you're not going to get paid a lot if you're out there, or get a lot of jobs if you're going against the person who's paying you. And that needs to be disclosed, because as your buddy said, it is, especially to, like, I guess, everyday folk who aren't in law enforcement, who aren't, trained in seeing, how like traffic reconstruction or any of those type of things, that may listen to somebody who is claiming to be 100% science and unbiased and take their word 100% and just say, hey, look, I mean, that's the nail in the coffin. To me, the nail in the coffin is the fact that there's parts of that tail light missing at 5:20 something a.m. and there's picture of it. I mean, you can't explain that, but to somebody else who maybe doesn't, can't put all those things, together because they're not trained in doing so. They'll hear this other person who's an expert and then say, hey, that person is independent, they're unbiased, it's science, and you're going to end up, moving the masses. And I can see how a lot of people will have some tunnel vision on a certain piece of evidence such as this and say, all right, well, I'm going to shut down everything else around it, and become dangerous. But do I think that, like, for instance, in this case here, can I say that ARCCA is an independent expert that's unbiased? I don't, no way. It's impossible. And,
no, I think you make a good point. Like, I think what you're saying is that even if an expert is truly independent and seeking the truth, they're interpreting difficult evidence, and no matter how smart they are, they're subject to mistake. And especially the more something is open to interpretation. And this is a complicated accident. Nobody witnessed it. There's no video of it. So you're putting together the pieces of the puzzle, and there's no question that John's injuries are outside of the range of what we would normally expect. Go ahead.
I think what a big important piece of what you just said is about the pieces of the puzzle is how much of the puzzle did they know as well. Now, how much of the information do these guys have? Do they have everything? Did they go to the scene? Do they have the car pieces? Do they have, all the data and information that is out there, or do they only know certain bits and pieces of information and don't have all the pieces? I think that also would play a huge role.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was a part of the thing that really exposed for me the bias of those guys, because not only were there not pieces of information that they didn't get and weren't interested in, but the key piece of evidence to me is the tech stream vehicle data. They didn't have it. They didn't ask for it. And they are actually experts on the tech stream data. They actually could have helped Trooper Paul of the Mass State Police, who, though he is trained for years and worked for years on EDR, so regular black box data, he was not an expert in tech stream. But the ARCCA guys are. And they have, in fact, they had published an article on their website from just a year before John died that said that you can recover data from TechStream. This is for any Toyota, Lexus vehicle that you wouldn't be able to get from the black box. They knew that, and they weren't interested in it. And this to me is kind of similar to if you is a medical examiner that does a report without looking at the body,
or a dog expert that doesn't want to look at the dog moldings of the mouth. I mean, it's almost exactly the same. Like when you have an expert that has potentially being presented with evidence that's undeniable, not wanting to look at it, to stay, in order to say that their theory is still potentially correct, is to not look at some of the evidence. I mean, that's what it boils down to, you know? But yeah, you're absolutely right. I see a lot of that in this case, and I think I had put that on my Discord earlier or yesterday when this came out. I was like, it's always the accusers that end up doing things, right? It's the accuser of the jealous, person in the relationship accusing somebody of cheating that's doing it themselves, or the politician accusing the other politician of doing something when they're the one doing it. Yeah, this defense team has been, throwing out controversy and this and that, and in the end, they were the ones that were hiding things. And I'm surprised. I'm surprised at this point.
Yeah, people. I mean, you're younger than me, so you probably don't remember the Peanuts Charlie Brown stuff, and the famous thing that they did over and over where Lucy holds the football down for Charlie Brown to kick, and at the last second, she always pulls it away and he flips over. And he would remember it, and he would say to her, "Come on, I know you're just going to pull the football." And she would always convince him, and every time she'd pull it. And so Charlie Brown never learns. And this is how it is with a lot of people in these cases. So Alan Jackson has gone out there and talked about non-human hairs, a hair that is now linked indisputably not only to human being but to John through DNA match. He's talked about gaps in the library surveillance video. When there's no gap, the camera is motion triggered and nobody drove by at that time. Karen went home in a different way. It's just on and on they do this. But what surprises me, because I was fooled by these things initially too. I was fooled by the library gap. I'm like, wow, a library gap. What is this, like the Watergate thing? There's missing 2 minutes. What's going on here? Because that's how he presented it. But once you see a couple of times, no, there's an explanation, and they knew it, but they just tricked us. Why don't we learn? Why don't people? I mean, some of us learn, but some people that I guess they want to be fooled, they never learn. And that's what's going on in this case. You're probably seeing this with Bryan Kohberger, Richard Allen, where some people in the public, their thirst for the conspiracy theory is so much that you have either someone in social media or a defense team that just keeps continuously putting out these tricky things that turn out to be not true, and they never learn. I don't know. It's weird.
Man, I was watching this movie not too long ago, and it was about I think it was called The Highwaymen. Good movie. Kevin Costner, Woody Harrelson.
Excellent movie.
Yeah, very much. And I did not realize that even back in the day, Bonnie and Clyde had such a following. These guys were taking the lives of people, and then you look at like the likes of the Rivera guy, the Night Stalker, and the following that he had, and that guy was absolutely disgusting. I just started to realize that throughout time, there's just been a certain group of people who just, for whatever reason, fall in love with the Night Stalker, the nastiness. I'm surprised Rex Humerman doesn't have a following at this point,
Right.
Maybe he does.
The guy that killed the health care guy, he's got a huge following. Even like regular mainstream people in the media seem to like some of them like him. because they believe this guy deserved to die, because he's a healthcare guy. But
I mean, I understand being upset with the system, the healthcare system. You know what I mean? But like taking the life of a person, that person. I mean, I'm not familiar with that case whatsoever. I mean, I've heard a lot about it, but I'm certain he's somebody's child, somebody's parent, brother, something to that nature. And so, feel for those people who have to deal with that, their loved ones' lives were taken, and the person who did it is being, vilified. And so it's crazy. It is crazy. But
and not only that, even if this, and I'm not saying that guy was a bad guy. I don't know anything about him. He happens to be the CEO for a big healthcare company. But even if he is a bad guy, but once people decide that it's okay to kill people just because they don't like their opinions, or they don't like how they do their job or whatever, you're putting that gun in the hands of someone that really isn't able to judge very well. So we had an interesting episode of My House here a couple of nights ago, Daniel. So I heard from a family member that at 3:00 in the morning, there was a man on the front porch. Now, where I am is actually, no, sorry, I just was looking at an email. Where I am is we've had off and on snow for the last month or so, and extremely cold, and there's a shortage of salt. So the walkway leading up to the front stairs is a sheet of ice, and it's also, we're in an area where there's no foot traffic at night ever. There's never anybody out there. So you'd start thinking automatically, because I've had threats and I've had food delivered to my house unpaid for, 20 times and stuff like that. And so when you hear there's a man there, I'm thinking man, it's got to be a pretty good chance that was some nut, right?
Yeah.
And the Ring video is what woke up the family member, and she was able to watch part of it live, but then later on, for some reason, she couldn't access the account. She had trouble with it, but eventually we did and got it. And you know what it was? It was not a man. It was something that we've always wanted to see in this area and never have. It was a very large snowy white owl.
Oh, wow.
That landed on the railing on the stairs, right below the Ring camera.
Yeah.
And that's what it was.
That's pretty cool.
It was really cool looking.
That's neat, man. I mean, it's scary thinking it was something else the entire time and stuff like that. But yeah, I've gotten messages too from the Kohbergers. It is, the length.
Oh, is that what they call them?
Well, that's the name I came up with. I got tired of calling. Yeah, I got tired of saying pro Kohberger because it was too long. And so I was just like, you know what, pro burgers. And it's kind of turned into like a tone thing. Some people don't like it. A lot of the pro burgers don't like it. They think it's what's the word I'm looking for? Defaming, like I'm defaming them or whatever, making fun of them. And I'm not. You're pro Kohberger. It's the pro burger. But
so these people that are pro burgers, they don't just believe. You follow this a million times more than me. So they don't just believe that there's not enough proof. They actually believe he's factually innocent, and there's like a hero to them or something. Is that?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, unfortunately, they think that he is factually innocent without. But here's the thing. So I went on this one guy's panel once, right? He was, he wanted to talk about the case, and he asked me if I'd go up there, and I said, yeah, I go up there. And he was like, he tells me, he's like, you know what, man, there's just so much going on right now. There's too many coincidences. And I was like, what are the coincidences that are making you think that it's not Brian Kohberger? And he goes, this guy proceeds to tell me, he's like, well, there was a car that was crashed in Oregon, which there was a car crashed in Oregon, a white Hyundai Elantra, no license plates on it. And, this happened around the time actually when they figured out who Brian Kohberger was. Right. And, nobody ever actually goes out there, just stays out there. In fact, some of these, some YouTubers had some people go out there to this car and take video of it. And they were looking for blood evidence and a bunch of other stuff. And it had nothing to do with the case. Well, anyways, That car came back once they figured out who the registration was. It came back to some random guy or person that lived somewhere in the state of Colorado. And at one point, the victim's house belonged to some other person, unrelated, in another completely different place in Colorado. And because both of them were from Colorado, that was too big of a coincidence.
You just talking about there was another murder case in Colorado, right? That was like similar to that?
No.
Oh.
The owner of the victim's house, at one point, one of the owners, at some time in the past, like I don't even think it was the current owner. It may have been the one before. He resided somewhere in Colorado, and there was a unrelated white Hyundai Elantra that was found that was registered to somebody else unrelated in a different city in Colorado. And they were like, oh man, the coincidences are too big that one Elantra in Oregon comes back to random dude in Elantra in Colorado, and the house belonged to somebody else in another part of Colorado is too big of a coincidence. Yet the fact that his DNA was in the house, he was out and about that night with his phone off. He admits he was out and about that night by himself in his car that he was driving around.
Yeah.
And all these things that boil down, that's not a big enough coincidence. But the fact that this random Elantra that has nothing to do with this case belonged to some random person in Colorado, that's too much for you. That is too much for you. You know, there was a point where there was a person who was claiming that everybody that was in that house was either lesbian, gay, or transgender, and that this was some sort of huge conspiracy, and that the chief of police in Moscow had committed this crime. And people believed it. People believed it.
It's unbelievable. I don't know. I mean, look at Alex Jones trying to say the Sandy Hook massacre was a false flag event and nobody died and stuff, or the number of people that think that nobody was on those planes on 9/11. I don't know. I guess some of these things are just too juicy to believe, or they fit their worldview of things. I think worldview maybe has a lot to do with it, right? The mistrust of certain things. I don't know.
I mean, and people are saying that's just the tip of the iceberg. That is just the tip of the iceberg of some of the claims. There was this one lady who was claiming to be a 21-year-old student who was friends of one of the victims and lived down the street, and claimed that the morning of the murders that she walked out, and from down the street, which is not visible from where she claimed that she was at, that she saw a group of kids in a circle doing some weird stuff and smoking some marijuana or whatever. And that happened at 8:00 in the morning. And then they this story kept going around, and all of a sudden people started doing like an interview with this lady, and she would cover her face, and I was like, man, that lady sounds like a 40-year-old lady with like a smoking problem, like a hardcore, like she's had a hard life. And you know, I was like, all right, whatever. All of a sudden, one of these interviews that she does, she accidentally turns on the camera, and I mean 100% accurate. There was this lady, she's much older. They called her Dot, I think. She kind of looked like Summer Wells' mom. I'm not sure, like identical. They kind of sound a lot alike too.
Yeah.
And then she turned it off, and come to find out she was some sort of TikTok troll. And she got all these people to believe that this entire story, and to this day, people still bring it up, that there was people outside of that house. It's insane.
Let me ask a question on the Kohberger case then. One of the things that I've talked about in the Karen Reed case, and I think it applies to, it's a starting point for a defense team. So on the one hand, you're going to try to create some doubt about the claims by the prosecution. But the other thing you want to do is focus on any odd things or seemingly odd things. And in the Karen Reed case, most of these things eventually get explained. But are there odd things that the defense can focus on in the Kohberger case?
So the
biggest seemingly odd things?
Yeah. So the biggest odd thing is going to be, first and foremost, that the victims didn't call 911 for 8 hours. Yeah. You know, that's the first thing that I guess that threw everybody off. Was like, all right, so this happened at 4 a.m, but police weren't called till noon. According to the PCA, a person was seen inside the house. There's been a lot of rumors that have been thrown out there that at one point the two surviving victims texted each other something about relative to the effect that, hey, is there somebody, I think somebody killed them, or something to the effect like, something happening. I think, a bunch of different things that could have been determined, would made the most reasonable person believe that there was an attack happening.
Right.
And so they didn't call. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that a lot of it had to do with my show too. We end up having somebody who came in on our channel who was from the area, who she knew some people. Like, her daughter was from the area. They did attend the University of Idaho, and one of them did attend the Washington State University in Pullman, where Brian Kohberger was at. But the extent of their knowledge wasn't that high. But they got on our channel, and they went from our channel to a bunch of different other channels, and their story just continued to grow and grow, and it became wild and completely fictional. And a lot of people believe that just because I was able to verify that they were from the area. But just because you're from the area doesn't mean you have any valuable information. There was a couple of kids whose lives were taken probably about maybe 2 miles away from my house about maybe a year ago or so. One of them was pregnant, turned into like a big old deal because lady was supposed to show up to get induced, didn't show up, her and her boyfriend. They were missing for a week, and then they found him shot in the vehicle. And happened about, not maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 miles down the road from me. And I don't know jack about it, but I'm from the area. That doesn't mean I know anything. You know what I mean? And so I knew who these, I was able to verify who these folks were, but they didn't really have any valuable information. The information they had was more rumor than anything else, which sparked a lot of other stuff. But here recently, there's so Ann Taylor has a way of words. She's a very Ann Taylor being the defense attorney. I would say she's not to Alan Jackson's level, but she's up there. Very, very well, like, she's good with words, and she'll make you think that she has something up her sleeve and never brings it out. She's like, oh, we're going to talk about that. We'll get there. Just wait. We're going to get there. And we never get there. But here recently, so with the Brian Kohberger case, the problem is that there's only touch DNA on the button of the knife sheath near the body of the victim. There's nothing else in that apartment or in that house that has his DNA. There's no blood, skin, hair, none of those things. And apparently there's no DNA in his car from the victims. There's no connection between him and the victims, nothing in the apartments. But so that's the other thing. And then lastly, most recently, there's been a couple of, it's been come to find out that there's 2 other samples of blood on the property that were unidentified at the time of Brian Kohberger's arrest. That doesn't mean that they're unidentified now, just at the time of Brian Kohberger's arrest, because that was one of the biggest arguments here recently in the Brian Kohberger's and his attorney's motions here, was the fact that that at the time of Brian Kohberger's arrest warrant, that the magistrate wasn't aware that there was other DNA in the house that was unidentified.
So was it DNA or blood? I've been confused.
It was blood.
It was blood. So
it was an unknown amount of blood on the handrail, and unknown what floor. It could have been on the first floor, the third floor, second. And then
can they tell how old it is?
They don't know. They don't know how old it is. There was a party though, like the night before. There was a party in that area. That house, the next door neighbor's house, Jack DeCore's house, which is one of the victim's boyfriends, he lived down the street. There was a party all up in that area. That was like a block party thing going on. There was probably
that was a party house, right? For a long time, that was known as a party house.
Yeah. And as far as party house, meaning just that people would go and get drunk and drink, and it was a house party. I mean, it was all the houses there on Greek Row. So even if you go there today at night, you're going to see a bunch of keggers and things of that nature. A bunch of college kids acting like college kids. Right. And so, who knows how long it was in there? Obviously, the night that the murders happened, 2 of the victims went to a bar. The other victims went out. I think Dylan I'm not sure where she went out that night, but all the others went to a Sigma Chi party. And so there was not a party at that house. But if you look through the windows and everything else, and the pictures of looking through the windows of that house, you see reminiscences of a party. You see a beer pong table with beer bottles and everything else. But that party wasn't from that night. That was from the night before. So the amount of DNA and the amount of stuff that's in that house, my gosh, you probably can't imagine. In fact, there was some new documents that were dropped that we're going to be going over a little bit later that have his as Q.1. And so I'm assuming there's like an A, 1, 2, and B, and so on and so on. There's probably quite a bit of DNA in that house all over the place. Right. Now, a lot of people are upset, like, hey, well, why didn't you test, the blood DNA? I'm like, well, you have something called resources, right? There's only one FBI lab that's going to be doing all this stuff, the IgG and things of that nature. Well, if you want to be, you want to respect them because they have other cases, right? This is not the only case in the United States that they're working on. And so you're going to send them the information that's the most likely that you can, that will lead you most likely to the suspect. Right?
Can they use like resources like Ancestry now to help with that? So without something like Ancestry, so let's say that blood came from two people that were at a party some point in the recent weeks, right? Before the event. Without Ancestry, you'd have to go around and somehow track down all those people that were visiting that house during parties. Just a gargantuan task. But if you maybe through Ancestry, you might be able to two things. You might be able to start to track down who that person was, but then also two, you can eliminate Brian Kohberger.
Right. Yeah. Well, they had so.
Not that Brian Kohberger was bleeding. I don't know that he was bleeding, but.
Right. Well, by all accounts, it kind of looks like it might go that way, to be honest with you. A lot of the experts that he's been bringing in are mitigation experts talking about his mental health and a bunch of other things. It really does look like he was, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a plea or at least an attempt. But when it comes to like, so re-say that question again.
So I'm trying to think like if Ancestry could be useful, but I guess now that I think about it, I probably misled you a little bit on that or didn't think it through very well. So, because they're trying to find somebody. So let's just assume the blood in there doesn't belong to Brian Kohberger and doesn't belong to any of the victims. And so you're trying to see who it belongs to. But still, you could use Ancestry to try to match it up. And then you find out, all right, it's so-and-so, and they were at the party here, and you go visit them and they give you an explanation. Yeah, I was there and I punched the wall and,
Right. And that may well have happened. So what it comes down to, like I mentioned before, is going to be the resources. So you're going to have to go in there and say, all right, which one are we going to do first? Which one are we going to do? We're going to, because they're different, right? That's one thing that you can tell right off the bat. Is you can enter them into CODIS, but you can also determine that they're not from the same person. The DNA that's on the knife sheath, the DNA that's on the handrail, and the DNA that's outside on a glove. They're different. Three at that point, 3 unknown male DNA. You have a party and a bunch of people that have been in and out of that house. And so you have some DNA on a handrail, which is commonly touched by a lot of people. Right. And then you also have a glove that's outside near the perimeter. So could it have been used in the crime? Maybe. It was found days later. It wasn't found during the initial search or that day or whatever the case may have been. And so you're going to go with the one that that the killer touched, because we don't know if the killer touched the handrail or not.
Right.
That could have been brought in by somebody else, but we do know that knife sheath was brought into the house. So you're going to test the knife sheath DNA first. Right. Now, once that comes back as somebody, you're going to go get your arrest. You're going to go and see first and foremost, like, all right, is this person, did he have the opportunity to commit this crime? Was there the means behind it? Motive, you're going to try to find as well, but that's not always something that's going to be populated first. First, you got to figure out, could this guy have committed this crime? Does he have an alibi? Was he somewhere else? Could he have been somewhere else? Is there an explanation? Because let's just say there is an explanation. Let's say he has an alibi. And one that's solid. Let's just say there's solid alibi. There's a video of him somewhere else. Well, he must have come in contact with that knife somewhere. So now you're going to look at him as a witness, right? You're going to go to him and say, hey, when did you touch this knife? Or who have you come in contact with that could have owned a knife, right?
Right.
But you look into his background and you find out that the white car that you're looking at on the surveillance camera going around in circles matches his. You check his phone, and his phone was off during the time of the murder, and it comes back on, and he's just slightly south of town. And so all those things take into play. And so now you have your guy, you go get your warrants and you arrest him. Now, from the time that they found out who he was through the IGG and the time that they arrested him was 9 days. And so throughout that period, how long, I mean, I'm sure they're going to go back and all right, and let's go look at the next piece of DNA that we need to do. Or first they're probably going to put in all their efforts in Brian Kohberger, like, hey, did you have somebody else? Who else was with you? Was there any, those type of things, and check his background, his phone, all of, retrace his steps to find out, is there another person that may have helped him commit this crime, and is their DNA the ones that are going to match that handrail and stuff? And once you complete that investigation and you say, all right, there's not, now you have to go and say, all right, now let's try to figure out whose DNA this is. So that way, when it comes down in court, we can, figure out if, one, if there's a suspect, or two, if there's somebody we can clear, that the defense isn't going to come back and try to, show reasonable doubt by saying, hey, we have this, speck of blood here on a handrail. Now, there was a hearing a couple of months back where, and I believe it was still when it was with Judge, where the prosecution mentioned that they had done DNA work and completed the DNA work that the defense had been mentioning. And the only DNA that they had been mentioning up to that point, or to this point, or at any point, has been the two unknown DNA samples, one on the handrail, one in the glove outside. And so their argument was that the judge may not have signed the warrant for arrest had the judge known at the time that there was still unknown DNA in the house. And so that's the argument that they're having here recently. And so I know it's confusing a lot of people, because they're thinking that means that today that's still the case, but that's not the argument. The argument isn't that today it's unidentified. The argument is that it was unidentified at the time when they got the warrant, which they didn't let the magistrate know. So so they try to
get the evidence thrown out based on that.
Right. They were trying to say that had they told the magistrate that there was unknown DNA in the house at the time, then maybe perhaps they would not have signed the warrant. And all that today, motions, Frank hearing, they had a bunch of motions to drop this, was all dropped. All of it today. Big win for the prosecution in that case. This case is going to trial. And in my opinion, well, unless he pleads out, which is a big possibility.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, I had a couple of questions for you. And so a lot of my audience is here. So you've probably answered these questions many times for your audience. So forgive me. And these require some speculation, but I just really want to hear your thoughts on it. So the first is, do you have any theory? And it's just a theory, obviously, but why Brian didn't kill, I forget the name of the young woman, but who saw him from her bedroom door and he walked right by her. Do you have any theory on that?
Yeah, a couple. From what I understand, so I've had conversations with quite a few people that are kind of close to the case. Some that are very close, some that are maybe a step or two back. One of those persons that I've spoken with was Howard Bloom, who has a lot of sources on his own. He's an author. He's written
his
for
book,
New York Times.
I haven't finished it yet, but I have his book. Yeah.
And so I've had his book, and he has some thoughts and theories on it. Man, I'm sorry, dude. My medicine's kicking in pretty good. What was the question again?
No. What was the theory? And it's totally speculative too. But what is the reason that he didn't kill the other girl?
Oh, yeah.
I forget her name upstairs.
So the thought is that they were texting, or somebody had yelled out something, and there was somebody else who had also told me that somebody had yelled out something at the during the time that the murders were happening, and that what they had yelled out was something like "shut up, be quiet," because the thought wasn't that it was that somebody was having their lives taken in that moment, right? And so my thought is that when you're doing something like this, you're probably super focused. You know what I mean? You're looking at what you're doing. And if somebody were to yell out a 2-syllable thing, shut up,
Right.
you're probably thinking to yourself, like, I heard somebody yell something, don't know what it was. Right. It's probably time to get the heck out of there. Small town, police department's not that far away. In fact, when he first comes out on camera, he's behind the police department heading straight towards the victim's residence. So he knows exactly about how long it's going to be for the police department to respond to that house, which is probably mere minutes. And so my thoughts are he's probably in the middle of doing what he's doing. He hears somebody. He hasn't gone down to the first floor. There's other people in that house. He doesn't even know where, Dylan is. And I mean, he's taking the lives of 4 people. It sounds like, based on some of the information that had come out on these documents, which I'm going to go over probably more in depth in another time, but I'll explain what one part here is that I said from probably about 2 years ago that Brian Kohberger, when he walked into that house, he opened the back sliding glass door one time and he never closed it again. It stayed open the entire time. And I said that for somebody to do that, and I said this 2 years ago, I said, for somebody to do that tells me that they had the thought that if they touch that door by closing it would mean that they'd have to open it again. And you would have to touch that door 2 more times, thus potentially leaving your DNA there. So I thought that door had been open forever. And there was
how was it known again, Daniel, that door, that he didn't close the door, and couldn't he have been wearing gloves? But how is it known?
Well, I knew based on one of my other conversations with somebody that the thought was that so there was 2 reasons. 1 or 3 actually. 1, there was a report that there was a door open when police arrived. 2, when there was a hearing, and early on they asked Chief Fry about the front door being open. He said he didn't know anything about it. And then when he was talking about the hearing about what happened, he mentioned that when they arrived, the door was still open. So he didn't know anything about the front door being open, but he knew that the backsliding, that when they arrived, the door was still open. So if it wasn't the front door, it had to have been the back door.
No, but I mean, how do you know that it was open when, like, I think if I misunderstood you, unless I misunderstood you, Brian, you're saying that Brian came in, opened the door, left it open, went and killed people, and then left without ever touching it again. Is that what you said?
Right.
Or
I do say that. I did say that.
So how do we know that he didn't just leave it open when he left?
Well, I can't divulge all of that one, to be honest with you. I have it under my best information that was at least at one point the thought. And
it's fascinating. I wonder how they could know that. Yeah.
Well,
I guess only the witness would know that, right? The surviving witness.
No. So what happened was, so documents were revealed today that Dylan thought that she heard Kaylee go upstairs, run downstairs with her dog. So in the PCA, it says that she heard what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog upstairs. That's what woke her up. What actually woke her up was Xana running upstairs. And what she thought the playing of the dog is that Xana came back running downstairs. And when she ran downstairs, Murphy, the dog, was in an open room, Kaylee's room. She ran down after him. And in the documents, it reports today that she heard Kaylee running down the stairs with her dog. Well, that wasn't the case. It was Xana that was running downstairs because she lost her life upstairs. Right. And they talk about how on the camera that heard the dog barking, that the dog was outside when it was barking. And when police got there, the dog was inside the bedroom. So the dog went outside, was barking from outside, and then at one point went back in. So if Brian Kohberger is taking the lives of Maddie and Kaylee, and the dog is running outside, it's not going to be able to open the sliding glass door on its own. So the sliding glass door had to have stayed open for the dog to have run outside and to be barking outside. Because at the same time that's happening, that the dog is barking outside, there is a sound of a struggle inside of Xana's room that's less than a minute, and it ends with a thud. And so during the time that the dog is outside, Brian Kohberger is inside Xana's bedroom, and that is commencing at that time. And
So
so
are you saying that Xana went upstairs and maybe saw them dead?
I don't think he saw them dead. I don't think she saw them dead. I think she heard some of the noises that was going on and walked up there, maybe saw a figure, turned around and said, I think someone's here, and ran down to go alert her boyfriend. One of the things that I had also said beforehand, because of the location of the Jack-in-the-Box bag, and this is one of the other reasons that led me to believe that the glass door was open, was something had to have gotten her out of bed. And I initially thought that if Brian Kohberger walked into that house and he opened up that backsliding glass door and left it open, that's going to create a draft. Maybe she felt that draft. That's what got her out of bed to go out and see what's going on. Maybe she put her Jack-in-the-Box there and heard some noise, went upstairs, sees the dog coming, runs down with Murphy, says, someone's here. She's running to alert her boyfriend. Brian Kohberger hears this, goes downstairs. The attack is there. Murphy's outside barking. Murphy comes back in, goes and hides in his room.
So Dylan is the survivor, right? That Dylan is the one that was on the second floor and survived, right? Do I get the name wrong? All right.
No, yeah.
So, and she opened the door a few times, right? Before, or maybe twice before she saw Brian, right? It was the third time she saw Brian, if I remember right?
Correct.
So if she opened the door, or her bedroom door, wouldn't she have seen the outside door open? And it was November, right? So wouldn't she have noticed that and closed it? Or
so where her door is, you wouldn't be able to see the sliding glass door. You wouldn't be able to see outside. And she admittedly was under the influence of alcohol. And she says that there was, a lot of it, she wasn't even aware of what was real and what wasn't real, and that probably had something to do with, the 8 hours or so. And it seems that they were pretty close to each other. And then the other thing that just got put out there was that he was carrying a vacuum, something like a vacuum in his hand.
Wow.
And I'm thinking it wasn't a vacuum, but maybe a kill kit.
Huh.
A bag. That was one of the things.
So Dylan saw him carrying something.
Yeah. Right? And she described it like a vacuum bag, like a vacuum type of like one of those little vacuum sucker things.
Yeah.
But shoot, it could have been one of those too.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, if they got Brian Kohberger through his DNA off of the button snap, right? That means that there's no skin underneath the nails or blood or hair or any of those things, right? At the crime scene. So this crime happened. Somebody committed this crime.
Yeah.
That means there's no blood or skin underneath the fingernails of anybody's fingers or anything, because that would have been the DNA you would have been looking for your perp. Right. And so for somebody to have gone in there and committed a crime, I'll ask you this. Where would you think you would find, DNA at, right? Do you think you would find the perp's DNA? Would it be more likely you would find the perp's DNA in a place where he took the lives of 4 people with a knife? That's close proximity, a lot of exertion, no time for cleanup, and they get out. Or do you think you would have more likely an opportunity to find the victim's DNA in his vehicle where he had 7 weeks to clean?
Oh yeah, obviously. And I think he was observed all that time at his parents' house to be cleaning that thing, right?
Correct.
Repeatedly. So I'm still surprised he was able to clean it that well, but apparently, he knows what he's doing and he's trying. So yeah, I guess it's not that surprising. And I think he probably wore gloves. Since this crime happened, and I've looked into like the use of K-bar knives and stuff like that normally you would injure your hand. But maybe if you had a glove on, that makes that less likely. So OJ we know had gloves on. But OJ badly injured his hand. And I guess that's normal. I've never stabbed anybody, but thinking if you're stabbing something, a hard object, once the blade hits it, then your hand's going to go onto the blade, right? Or a pretty good chance of it.
Yeah.
So, I would think there's a good chance that OJ's blood was found at the crime scene.
Yeah.
So, and his hand was bleeding the next day when he came after he came back from the airport. He came in the house. So, but it doesn't sound like Brian did. How long after? So, how long after the murders was Brian arrested?
About 7 weeks. It was a little bit over 7 weeks.
7 weeks. Yeah. So he would have healed by then. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But if he would have cut himself there, I would have expected to be some sort of blood there.
A scar. Yeah.
And I'm not sure what type of,
yeah.
I'm not sure what type of knife that OJ was using, but the K-bar knife is used because it has a pretty good sized guard on it, and so that way it prevents you from sliding on there. If it wasn't for that, if he didn't leave the sheath behind, I don't think this case would have ever been solved. I mean, at this point, I don't, because even if like, let's just say somebody, because people were getting suspicious of him, he had lost his job, people were complaining about him, things of that nature. So I wouldn't have been surprised if somebody would have said, like, hey, you might want to look at this kid. They look at his phone records. His phone was off during the time of the commission of the crime, drives a vehicle that matches, but you don't really have anything that puts him inside there.
So they would have known it was probably him, but they wouldn't have been able to prove it.
Exactly. You'd have been like, yeah, it's pretty obvious it's this guy, but you can't prove it without that. I mean, so
what a nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. His biggest mistake there was that. And, a lot of people will say, he made a bunch of stupid mistakes, which he did, but none of those mistakes cost him to get caught. It was leaving the knife sheath. I mean, if any of those other things, the vehicle driving around without a front license plate, there's nothing there that identifies his car. The fact that his phone was off.
Was that definitely a mistake that he left the knife sheath there? Or was it a signature? Or is there something? It's a weird mistake, right? It's because it's so.
I strongly suspect it. What I think happened is that he walked up in there and he was surprised that there was two people in the same bed. I think his sole goal was I don't know how many people he was planning on, whose lives he was planning on taking. It sounds like he went straight up to that third bedroom floor and just went straight there. So it sounds like,
of course, he might have heard, if he had to walk by the door with Ethan and Xana, right? So he may have heard a male voice in there.
Well, they were on the other side of the house, and I think Ethan was already asleep. The only person that was awake, according to the PCA, was Xana. She had ordered a DoorDash delivery, which arrived at approximately 4 a.m., which is an approximation. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's 4 a.m. It must have been around the same time that Brian Kohberger was there. Not necessarily. There was some other time frame that they mentioned, as far as, like, for instance, when Brian Kohberger's phone was turned off, they mentioned approximately 2:47 a.m. It was 2:54. So it was an approximation. I wouldn't be surprised if it was slightly earlier than 4 o'clock, maybe a little bit after, but there's a DoorDash order there. If I had to guess, like, if I were to say this is what I think happened, Xana ordered a DoorDash. It's a tricky area, right? King Queen Road. The address is on King Road, but it's facing Queen. And so I would assume that, especially if you've lived in that house, according to Xana's friends, that this was something that was, like, not uncommon of her to order things at odd hours of the night and stuff like that off of DoorDash. You probably understand that your house is a little bit tricky to find. You're probably going to put some sort of indicator, whether it's a light or something, on to show that the DoorDash person, this is where I'm at. Now, Brian Kohberger turned into that area 3 times before he stopped. And it wasn't until after the DoorDash order was delivered that he stopped. And so to me, that tells me that he's probably seeing the light travel when he goes into the first time, second, and third, some sort of indicator. And then that 4th time, it's no longer there. And that gives him the go ahead. He gets in there. He goes in through the back sliding glass door, goes straight up to the 3rd floor, sees 2 people there. Maddie, her injuries weren't as ferocious as Kaylee's. And my suspicion is because, well, they were both asleep. They were both intoxicated. There's video of them out that night. You can probably attack one with a little bit more precision, while they're both asleep. It's probably going to alert the person next to them. So you're going to have to,
and then it becomes a fight. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's why it's more ferocious than the other. I know that made a lot of people think that maybe she was the target. Right? Correct. But I'm not sure about that one. And then you have what sounds like Xana going up and then coming back down, running, the dog following her, dog running outside, barking, indicating that the door remained open the entire time. Again, somebody to be that conscientious of not touching that door or to leave it open so that way they touch it not as often. So that way it's
Right.
less likely that they're going to leave DNA behind.
So they're
That's-
less likely to be. So he's probably not wearing gloves then if he's.
No, he's probably wearing gloves. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, if you're going through that much thought and preparation to say, all right, I'm going to open
Yeah.
the door and leave it open so that way I don't have to touch it again.
Right.
I mean, that's a lot of preparation. And that type of preparation don't stop at the murders. You're going to prepare your car. You're going to prepare your escape. You're going to prepare how you're going to clean your car, your alibi, your whole 9 yards. And so,
I want to throw a crazy idea by you. I do that sometimes. I get random crazy thoughts. So I didn't know what a vacuum bag was. This is the first I heard about this. So I just looked it up to see what it looks like. And the reason I looked it up because I had a theory. If you're Bryan Kohberger, and like you said, this is so meticulously planned, and your idea is you're going to walk into this house, you must have a plan in the back of your head, something you're going to say if you get caught. And you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, just even when I was in college, I was in bed with my girlfriend, and we woke up, and there was a large man in the room.
Mhm.
And I said, hey, now we didn't have clothes on, so I couldn't really chase him immediately. But he made some kind of excuse like, oh, is so-and-so here or something like that. He already had some kind of a thing in his idea. He was going for my wallet, which was on the bureau, because he was going in that direction. And he obviously had something. He already had it ready, snapped it right through. Oh, is so-and-so here? I'm like, get out of here, you know? So Bryan Kohberger would have thought if I get caught. Now, obviously, if it's that time of night, you're not going to say, "Oh, I was here to repair the cable." You know, I'm here bringing an Amazon delivery. So what I was wondering is the one thing that would be working at that time, as we know, is DoorDash. So could he have been carrying some kind of one of those, insulated bags that the food delivery people use? Could that? And I looked it up on the vacuum bag on Google after you said that, and it looks kind of similar to those. I don't know. Is that a crazy idea?
I mean,
and he had his kill kit in there, like you said, but
I definitely think it was some sort of kill kit.
But could it have been like in an insulated bag like that? So then if he got caught, he'd say, hey, I'm here to bring some food in. Who ordered food? I'm looking, is that possible? I don't know.
I mean, it's possible. I just think that if you walk up in on him or even if, like, for instance, I think he went in there with one thought in mind, and I think if somebody woke up, it was not going to end well for them. And I think that ended up being what ended up happening, especially with like somebody like Xana.
Right. But what if you walk in the door, it's a party house, and there's 4 guys drinking beers at the table you didn't expect? You're not going to attack them.
No, but this was like a open house, like all the windows, like you can see inside. Yeah. Right. Like the bedrooms had their shutters closed, but like the back, like if you walked in, the sliding glass door was wide open. So if you just parked there and you just kind of like, if you parked in the back far enough, you can actually see into like Maddie's room if it was open, like the window shades. But you can sneak around there. I mean, it's really close to the street. Like it's probably about 8 feet from the house to the street. And if you're pulling up side by side, you can see inside there. He passed by 3 different times and very slowly, except for the last time he passed by pretty quickly. I think he would have known if there was a lot of people that were in there or not. And at the same time, he really didn't, because I don't think he was aware. I don't think he knew what that light was for, right? I mean, you and I and Xana knew that light was on for the DoorDash driver, but Bryan Kohberger didn't know what that was for. Right. And so he may have just assumed that they went to sleep, and he may have thought that they were asleep at that point.
He'd been there many times before, so he probably knows they leave the light on normally.
Right. Or, a bunch of different reasons. And he may have thought, all right, they've gone to sleep. I'm going to make my entry now. And Xana wasn't asleep, and he found himself in a situation where he had to end up taking the lives of other people. Is it possible that his thought or his goal was to take everybody's life in that home? I mean, that's possible. We don't know. The only thing that I can say is
Ted Bundy, where I think he had a sorority on his last murder spree. Are you familiar with the case?
Yeah, a little bit.
And so he attacked multiple girls. I think 2 died, maybe 2 didn't. I'm going on memory. I could be slightly off of the numbers there, but there were plenty of other girls in there, all girls, no guys. And so people said, why did he leave? And they think it was because he saw headlights and he got spooked.
Mhm.
And that's similar to what you're saying, that Brian Kohberger may have got spooked by hearing something. And that's all reasonably possible too. But I think another possible theory is with these guys that are serial killers. And I think Brian Kohberger, my personal belief is that that's what he was. I'm not saying he killed before, but he's a budding serial killer. He's a guy that he's killing for the sake of killing. He's been fantasizing about killing probably since he was 15. And these guys run these theories through over and over again, and the science has shown that the dopamine that people that are psychopaths are normally low. They're normally low in, but when they're getting stimulus, you can go back. You probably want to do that, so you can. That's fine. You can.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I wasn't sure what one of my guys was saying, but go ahead.
And it's a chemical thing that's going on in their body, and the highest level it reaches is actually when they're in the stalking mode. So the whole buildup, but then at some point it does kind of expend itself. But I think that some of these guys, that's when they stop. So they're not. He's going into the house in a sense to kill a bunch of people, but at some point the hormone has worked its way out of his body, and he's spent, and he wants. So my theory is that's why he didn't kill Dylan. I don't know. Maybe that's probably not a good theory. I thought maybe he was hurt, but I think maybe if he was bleeding, he wanted to get out of there so he didn't drip on the floor. But it doesn't sound like he was hurt. Although
he had a doctor's appointment. He had a doctor's appointment like right afterwards too, that he went to and did like a physical. Like he set up some things to make it known, like that he. So he changed
no injuries. Oh,
yeah, no injuries. He didn't go to school or work the next day, but the following day he did. He maintained his appointments. He never went back to Moscow, which was crazy because that's one of the things that he did change, right? So up to that point, he'd gone to Moscow a few times, and then he never went back. He only gone to and this also came out in the documents that he did in fact go to the victims' homes the morning after. That he was there at that place between 9 something or whatever.
Terrifying. Like 2.5 hours before the police were called, right? I mean, just.
Yeah, exactly. And, for me, that just tells me that he probably had like a radio because, cops, he was in criminal justice. He would have known, if that crime had been reported, the first thing you're going to do is put a camera up there and get all the pictures of everybody that's passing by, anybody walking by, anybody driving by, because people tend to revisit the scene. And he did that morning. And so if he was willing to do that and take that risk, that tells me he had probably a radio. Because he couldn't search it, right? Because if he searches 4 students murdered and hadn't happened yet or not reported, he's in a bit of trouble, right? So, if he would have shown up, like just because it's not in the news doesn't mean that they haven't found it yet either. He could have shown up, and
if he showed up and they had already discovered it, there would have been cops everywhere, and he would have seen that from a fairly good distance away.
And his license plate could have been documented and a bunch of things, and then that ball starts to get rolling. So for him to make a risk like that to drive out there tells me he probably had a dispatch, like not a dispatch, but like a radio.
Do you think he threw it out because it wasn't discovered in his apartment, right?
No, I think he took it from. Well, he was so Whitcomb 911 for Pullman and for Moscow comes out of Pullman, Washington, and I believe they have radios in their chem lab, and he's suspected of breaking into the chem lab.
So they just returned it later.
Yep.
Or threw it out. Yeah.
Because I think he returned it back, but because there was a chem lab that was broken into, and Howard Bloom and a bunch of other people that I know have reported that he may have broken into it.
Man, they got to check those. Dude, that's a good idea, Daniel. They got to check those radios for evidence. There could be blood on them. There could be DNA on them. Have they done that?
I'm not sure about that, but so when I looked into the chem lab, it was more than a chem lab. It was every supply that goes to that school, including like the radios and dispatch radios and stuff like that for the WSU Police Department. and their security. And so he would have had access to them if he would have broken into it. And
Right.
it's been speculated. I mean, it's been speculated. I'll say speculated that he did. But it is it's interesting. It is interesting.
That's a really good idea. I don't know if that's your idea. I think they should check those. I don't know how late it is now, but check those radios for blood evidence and DNA evidence, right? I don't know, but he may not have had it with him that night, though. He would have had it just the next morning, I guess. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the crazy thing too, right? So remember they say that he travels on the PCA. It says that he goes up Nevada Street, and that's where his phone turns off or whatever or whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, right there, when he's in that area for like 9 minutes, guess where the chem lab is? It's right there.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. So that was the other thing too. Howard Bloom has a suspicion that they believe he was building a bomb.
Wow.
That he was going to do something with that. Now he lost his job. He was pissed off. I mean, it is,
Have you seen his high school posts when he was going through a dark period?
Yeah.
I forget what he was posting on Facebook. Those are just, to me, so revealing because they strike me. I'm not a psychologist, but I've researched this a lot. There's a couple of really good books on psychopathy. The original one, The Mask of Sanity, was written in like 1947, but it still holds up. But there's another one that I read that's about a doctor, a neuroscientist, who learned from accidentally looking at his own MRIs of his brain that he himself was a psychopath. Then he pieced it. Psychopath doesn't mean he's a murderer. He doesn't have any. It just means he has a different kind of brain, and his brain is let's call it. It's fair to call it damaged, but 2% of the global population is born with a psychopathic brain, and they don't feel empathy. There are some other differences about it. They don't feel emotional empathy the way normal people do. So, I forgot where I was going to go with it. I'm sorry, man. I guess I must need another sip.
Yeah, no, he had those tendencies, or not tendencies. Let me rephrase that. He did write about having those tendencies of having those loss of emotion, loss of empathy, loss of remorse. I believe he said that he felt like people were like a sack of meat, including his father, and that he was an a-hole.
Yeah. Like they were like video game characters.
Right, exactly.
Very, very two-dimensional, and even his own family members. And
right. And like, so when I was a police officer, I was trying to go for before my back injury, I was attempting to go federal, and I was applying for to be a federal agent, and I was taking one of their tests. And in one of their tests, it was like one of the the practice questions was like, all right, for this part of the test, we're going to ask you these questions, and they're going to be referencing like everybody that's in the Border Patrol speaks Spanish, but not everybody that speaks Spanish is in the Border Patrol. And so, using that same type of logic, people that commit these type of crimes typically have a loss of feeling, remorse, and those type of things throughout their life. Not saying that everybody that has that turns into a serial killer, but those that tend to have that issue in their past.
Yes.
And right before this happened, he was doing his thesis, and he had a Reddit that he was trying to communicate, which I'm sure he did make contact with. But he was communicating with ex-cons and current cons who were convicted of violent crimes. And he wanted to know a few things like, how they felt, why they chose their victims, where they chose to enter, leave, what got them caught, and a bunch of things that had to do with feelings and emotions during the commission of the crime. And, if you have other people who are committing these violent crimes, they probably have some of these lack of emotions, lack of feelings and remorse, etc. Right. And now you have these two guys that are having the same side of feelings. I think that there's a possibility there that Brian Kohberger may have been like, hey, I can relate to that person. I have those feelings. I've felt that way. And then the temptation of committing a crime like this ends up happening.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like I think if you look, the ingredients for the soup that goes into a killer is in each one of us. The ingredients for everything any human being does is in each one of us. And if you sometimes look through that, you might get an idea. So everybody, every human, but especially boys, are drawn to fantasies of domination. I don't mean sexual domination. I'm talking about winning the fight, winning the football game, winning the boxing match, winning the game of Monopoly, whatever. People are competitive, especially guys, but also girls too. And we get a reward in our brains for experiencing things like that. But what stops us from developing the full part of that, where it goes out of control and leads down a road to murderous fantasies, is that we have that empathy in our brains that kind of puts the brakes on that. You wouldn't. So you're 13 years old and you're first developing fantasies of dominance, winning the fight and stuff like that, and then now you're hitting puberty, so that's starting to blend with sexual urges and stuff like that. But you would not develop an urge to hurt somebody because you have empathy. But if your brain lacks that empathy, there's kind of no brake system there. And not in every psychopath, and in probably most of them it doesn't, but in a higher percentage of them than in normal people, that's going to spiral out of control. And you just, those fantasies develop over years and years, and then it seems like a lot of them don't act on them until they're about 27 years old. That number has always struck out to me as the most common age, 27, when they first start acting on them, like BTK and so many of them. But they've been developing those fantasies for a long, long time. So I don't know.
You know what's crazy? You mentioned like BTK and things. Brian Kohberger went to the Sales University and studied under Kathleen Ramsland, who wrote the autobiography with wrote the biography with BTK, and she had a lot of conversations with a bunch of serial killers and things of that nature. Brian Kohberger's quote unquote alibi. And I know a lot of people have kind of put in a lot of comparisons to other people. And I think there's quite a bit, but I think more so than ever, Ted Bundy, I think, is somebody that in my opinion, there's a lot of coincidences there. So Ted Bundy, there was a sorority house, but he also went to different Washington State University, but a different Washington State University out there in Washington, and committed his crime. But the place where Brian Kohberger claimed he was at the Wawawai Park, stargazing. Well, is it Janet LePage? Joyce LePage. She was a person who passed away. She attended WSU in Pullman, and her body was found at the Wawawai Park. And there was theories that was Ted Bundy's first victim. Now, whether or not that was Ted Bundy's first victim is irrelevant.
He's drawing the connection in his own mind.
Is Brian Kohberger drawing that connection? Yeah. And if that is the case, his alibi, and let's just say he did commit this crime, which I strongly suspect he did, his alibi is that he was in the location where Ted Bundy potentially dumped his first victim. What do you think about that? Yeah, it does. I mean, we know he's obviously went into that field, was communicating. I don't know I forget if he communicated directly with BTK, but just that writer you mentioned, maybe that's who we talked to. So yeah, he definitely had an obsession with these cases. Do you think that these were his first kills? Kohberger's? I don't know, man, because there's a slew of young ladies who have passed away in Pennsylvania that are interesting. In fact, so there was this one lady, Ashley Fugel, and one of my another fellow creator, Nina Warning Label. Nina, she put this connection together. So Ashley Fugel was a girl that was early on when Brian Kohberger was arrested. Somebody that a lot of people were saying was Brian Kohberger's only girlfriend. But when you look into her story, she was in a lot of well, I don't know about a lot of it. The last relationship she was in was a same-sex relationship. Yeah. And so I don't know if she's always been that way. Maybe she at one point dated men, but they were friends. And I believe she lived on Lindsay Lane, and she passed away of an overdose, a heroin overdose. And at the time, Brian Kohberger was at one point in his life, I'm not sure if at the time of Ashley Fugel's death, if he was still heavily into heroin, but at one point in his life he was. Yeah. And there was an article out there that said that he was looked at as a suspect at one point in Ashley Fugel's. Yeah. And then it turned out to be supposedly a suicide. But then there was another girl that kind of looks similar to Ashley. So Ashley Fugel kind of looks a little bit like Xana. And the crazy thing is that next to the residence, next to that, the King Road residence is an apartment complex. And behind that apartment complex is another one that had a camera that captured a lot of footage of the car going back and forth. That's the Linda Lane footage. Well, that apartment complex, apparently, I heard from somebody else that the owner of that complex was approached by Bryan Kohberger and potentially looked at a couple of the complexes that was owned by him before he ended up moving to the one in Pullman, and that he was looking at a couple of those. And so,
do you think he actually was just using it as an excuse to scout, kind of get inside, or was he really looking for an apartment there?
He probably was really looking for an apartment there, but I think that may have been the opportunity that he had to come across, and like maybe come across the victims, because they were a big party house, you know. And I often thought that if this guy's sole motive was, all righty, you know, I'm fed up with the world, you know, nobody believes in him, because you know he's talked to his friends before, right? And their friends have come out, and there was some text messages shown between a buddy of his about Bryan Kohberger talking about becoming a detective, and that he wanted to be involved in high profile cases and a bunch of other things. Well, he wasn't going to be a cop anymore, right? He was losing that opportunity. He had a heroin problem when he was younger, and he lost every job. He was fired from every job he's ever had. He's had issues with stalking and things like that. And then he got fired as a TA at WSU. The intern police department, or when he applied to be an intern police officer twice, they didn't accept him. So that was never going to be in his future again because of his behaviors and all those other things. And so, you know, you have three roles when it comes to a high profile case. You know, you're either the detective, the killer, or the victim. And I don't think he wanted to be the victim, and he's not going to be the police officer. And so, you know, if his goal was that.
So maybe his desire had been contained for possibly years, because he still had that goal of wanting to be a police officer. And you're saying, but so at this point, that seemed to be evaporating. So he had no reason not to act on it anymore. He had less reason. Is that what I think?
That, and I mean, he had an illusion of grandeur, or whatever it's called. You know, and he's
psychopathic trait. Yep.
Right. He spoke about these things. He wrote these things down. That was his words. And you know, to be honest with you, I thought that the motive behind it was that he wanted to be a part of one of the biggest unsolved murders. And if he wasn't going to be the one solving it, he's going to be the one creating it. And you know, how do you do that? You know, without getting caught, right? He wants to get away with it. So you can't, as much as he's had problems with people around him, if he targets them, it's going to come back to him. So you target somebody who lives in a different, you know, state that's close enough that you can travel to, somebody that has no connection to you whatsoever. If you want this to be something that is, you know, as big as it become, you know, attractive young persons, as the victims were, multiple victims in an unsolved case, is also going to create a high profileness. And so, you know, maybe that's why a bunch of cars outside didn't bother him, because it didn't matter who it was. They were just, he wanted to, this is the outcome he wanted.
So you're saying here that maybe he didn't have these, I'm going to call them sexual, because they really are sexual fantasies about killing. For people that have these, for psychopaths and serial killers, no, I shouldn't say so. For serial killers who have these fantasies about killing, that's sex for them. That's their sexual release. It's a sexual fantasy that they've had. So Richard Allen, he would have had fantasies like that for years, all his life. The fantasies always start when you're younger. You're not going to suddenly start having fantasies about killing someone when you're in your 40s. Those would have started when he's in his teens, and something prevented him from acting on them. There's many things that could prevent that. It could be lack of opportunity. It could be internal. You don't see yourself as a killer or something like that. So, but you're saying, Brian, go ahead.
This was the first time he was living on his own.
So what you're saying is it's not that he necessarily had these sexual fantasies of killing. He just wanted to be. He's more the media part. He wanted to create this thing that was his signature, Not that he wanted to be caught, but say that's my big killing. That's my,
I
that's my
mean,
work of art.
to a certain extent, I think that it's probably multifaceted. And again, I'm not like a doctor or anything to say that that's what it is to diagnose or nothing like that. But what I would say is I think that there's a lot of things that were happening in his life. He was losing his job. His opportunity to be a law enforcement officer has gone out the window. I mean, he was a PhD student in criminal justice. And the whole goal was to work in law enforcement with that. And if you can't even become an intern police officer, you're shot. You're done. Everything he had worked for was completely thrown out the window. So, I mean, there was probably a lot of things that went into it. The sexual aspect of it probably was there as well. He seemed like a super disciplined person. I mean, he lost a lot of weight. He, he changed his life around. You don't do that by not being a disciplined person. You don't commit a crime like this. Correct. You don't commit a crime like this without leaving as much, evidence as he did, the little amount of evidence that he did without being very disciplined. He didn't go back to the house afterwards. He didn't return to Moscow, period, after that morning once the bodies were found. And I mean, that took a lot of discipline out of somebody like that. And so maybe perhaps he was able to discipline himself up until this point, but once his world started to fall apart, and I heard, this is the rumor mill. I'm pretty confident in my rumors on this one, though, that there was a specific female that he may have been interested in that didn't go well.
Can you share which one you think it was, or
a PhD student there as well? There's so much like a secret. There was something that came out so I know a little bit more than what came out there. There was was it like a Dateline or something that these PhD students were basically jotting down information about Brian and his behaviors because it was becoming disturbing, his arguments, how he was reacting and things of that nature. They called it a Brian tally. But what I also found out about it is that there were certain situations where he may have placed himself in between, like in his office, not necessarily like something that's like super bad, but like he would put himself between him and this one specific person, so that when she'd have to go through him to get out of the room, which apparently wasn't supposed to be something that you could do. Some following and some other things that may have occurred that led to Snyder. I mean, the guy lost his job pretty quick. I mean, things were coming up pretty fast. I know quite a bit of things that he did in a few different schools, and a lot of them seem to be very consistent with having some disturbing behaviors when it came to women. He gosh, it's kind of, I don't want to say something that's going to get somebody in trouble for telling me something. You know what I mean?
I know. I get it.
You know what I'm saying? And also I don't want to give away anything that maybe some, I don't want to say it sounds so stupid to say, oh, it's my sources.
I know. I hate using that too. It's
know what I mean?
It's like, like I'm Bernstein and Woodward. I generally try to refuse using that word sources. Like, I don't have sources. I just have someone to talk to me.
Exactly. I got people that reach out to me that tell me things. And, sometimes or a lot of times these things end up being very accurate. And in this situation here, I was aware of, like, for instance, there's an app that may have ended up on somebody's phone that allowed Brian Kohberger to watch where they were.
Okay. So
that happened in one situation. And it's I know which app and I know how it worked and how it went down. But it didn't happen with any of the victims that passed away or anybody that was in the 1122 King Road residence. This is completely separate from that. So that's one thing that I know that hasn't been put out there.
Do you think he would have entertained fantasies about killing that person and just didn't act on them for some reason, or?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I didn't on that one. I'm not. It resulted in him losing his position somewhere, but.
So that person must live in terror that he somehow gets acquitted.
He's not, so this wasn't anything that happened in Moscow. This is something well before that. But yeah, there was something that happened in Pullman with well, there was a lot of things. He started getting in fight. Well, this one I can talk about. He's gotten fights with his professor a couple of times, but there had been reasons, right? It wasn't just like, okay, my professor got into an argument with me. There was other students that were reporting things along with what the professor was seeing, and they were able to get that stuff. He was treating apparently like women differently. I mean, even some dudes too, very arrogant, very difficult. But at the same time, I mean, when does school start, right? Like in late August, early September. And by the first week of October, he was already in trouble.
Yeah.
Going through a disciplinary action. So within a month and a half, I mean, it's got to be something serious. He lost his job before the end of the first semester as a TA. I mean, it's got to be something pretty serious. And we're going to find out a lot about what that is. There was a lot of talks about him and another female that was seen with him. I think it was reported, and I like to talk about things that were reported because it's
I know why. Yeah,
you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so it was reported that there was a female of that may have appeared to be of Asian descent, and that may have been like his girlfriend, right?
Right.
I don't think so. I think they were friends at one point, but I think that there's going to be a big different story that we're going to find out about how that relationship, and I put that in quotations, worked out. Because I know a little bit about that situation as well. Which it might be the same situation that I was talking about earlier with the PhD student. Hint, hint.
Right.
But I mean, he there's also the behaviors that he had leading up to and during and after the crime. So that's one of the things, like I was talking to with my detective friends when it comes to the Karen Reed case. He was telling me, he's a homicide detective, and I was talking to him about Karen Reed, and he's like, hey, you have your pre behavior, your during the crime behavior, and your post. And with Karen Reed, the beforehand stuff, you had the relationship, falling out, the messages, you had her going out to Brian Higgins and being very vindictive, because it seems like at that point, if I had to put my money on it, I would have said that John O'Keefe probably told her something to the effect that the relationship is ending, and she was retaliating against him by going after another law enforcement person, man.
Yeah.
And so, especially somebody in his circle, because apparently they knew each other, right?
Yes.
Because he had his phone number. What it sounds like at one point, and
she got his phone number from somebody at the bar, but that's where
Higgins knew O'Keefe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so she went after somebody.
Not very well though. Not very well,
but enough to have his phone number, right?
I'm not sure about that actually.
Well, I thought Higgins texted O'Keefe, "Where you at?"
He did. So by then he did, yes. But at the time, I mean, so I would say yes, because we know that in those communications that Karen began the textual relationship, flirting with him, and he's like, "Where'd you get my number?" And she said, "I got it from someone at the hillside." So she didn't get it from John, but I guess that obviously would arouse suspicion on him. So yeah. So Higgins did have definitely had John's text number. Yep, his phone number.
So she went after somebody in law enforcement in the area that lives in the area, so to speak, I think. And might be somewhat in the circle there, close enough not to be a friend that's going to be like, hey, you're my buddy's girl, what are you doing? But far enough that we'll be all right.
Let's hook it up. So he's not going to run to John right away and say, Jesus, your girlfriend just hit on me,
Exactly. And so very vindictive behaviors, right? I mean, there's a lot of like anger there. I mean, especially like when you listen to like how she reacted in that trip with one of John's friends and cussed her out and stuff like that. Then you have during the time of the murders, that behavior. And in Karen Reed's case, you had, her leaving, going back and forth, driving all over the place, saying, could I have done this? Did I hit him? Being drunk under the influence of alcohol. Yeah, the tail light piece is missing. I mean, there's evidence there. And then you have the post, what does she do after the fact? And a lot of the things that she was saying, she's changing her story, going from an accident to it was this, to it was that, to I saw him walking close, to I saw him walking in, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of incriminating evidence there based on the behavior. And the same thing goes for Bryan Kohberger. I mean, he purchased a lot of the stuff that he had used right before the murders had occurred. He was acting up. He was having problems with his job, with his TSA. He was losing that. He was problems with authority at work, problems with women. And then during the crime, his phone is off during the murders. That's part of the behavioral aspect of it. He's out and about by himself, as he mentioned and admitted. Vehicle matching, his is out there. And you also have the fact that that when his phone does come back on, it comes back on. He's near the residence. The next day, it's acting up again. He's passing by the residence in the morning, and then he's back over where his phone was off, and he turns it off again for about 5 hours. And I mean, at the end of the day, he ends up driving around for like 2 days straight without sleep after killing 4 people, and during that time kills 4 people. And we're supposed to believe he's not under the influence of anything, but whatever.
Right.
And then you have the post, right? He wasn't there the day afterwards. He started wearing gloves everywhere he went. He got real paranoid. He fled the area, went to his dad's in Pennsylvania with his dad. I know people say, oh, it was pre-planned. It was like 3 weeks pre-planned. So it was planned after the murders.
Planned after the murders, yeah. Did he, when he went for his doctor's appointment, his physical, did they do blood work?
I'm not sure. The person who came out said that they couldn't say anything about the doctor's appointment because it would violate his rights or HIPAA or whatever. All they said is that he attended and that he was charismatic and that he was friendly, I think is what they said. And I was like, oh, that don't really sound like him, because everything everybody else has said, he's like,
or when he tries to be friendly, it's going to be awkward. Like he almost comes across as menacing because he doesn't know how to do it. He's socially, I don't know if awkward's the word. I guess that's the nicest word to say. He's socially awkward. He doesn't know how to connect to people without coming across as odd. And
right.
So was he putting on an act, though, that day? Because that's something that, well, see, psychopaths are the world's greatest mimickers, but they can only do it for very short spurts. So a doctor's appointment, that would count as a short spurt.
Yeah. And he maintained a hair appointment. The guy he's not stupid. He's not the most intelligent person in the world. I mean, he made a bunch of dumb mistakes, which is why he got caught. But at the end of the day, he's not stupid. And like I said before, if it weren't for that knife sheath, man, this guy would have gone away with it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think he would have. I don't think they would have ever been able to prosecute him without it.
Yeah.
Without that happening. It's because let's just say, because if they didn't have that, who's to know how long it would have been before they would have gotten on his trail? And by that point, how much stuff would have been lost, right? Because that's the difference between like a case that occurs now and a case that occurs, or a cold case, right? And that's why I say once you get like somebody in mind, like, hey, I think that this person committed this crime, as long as it's not a cold case, it's pretty easy to prove.
Right.
Because there are some things that have to be done. The person has to leave the house. The person has to travel there. There's some things that need to be done that you can go in and look for. And if it's a cold case, you may not have access to cameras and footage, and things get erased, things get deleted, things get re-recorded, et cetera, et cetera. And so, for this case here, it's obvious what happened. There, as far as like, and I know you mentioned it earlier, like, what are some of the things that, people are looking at in this case and saying, hey, that's weird. A lot of it has nothing to do with Bryan Kohberger or the case. It has like other random people. Like there was a guy named Bryan Kohberger who passed away. He was a former military guy. He had PTSD, threatened the life of some of his roommates in Pullman, Washington. SWAT gets there, takes out his life. And yet, people think he had something to do with this case just because he lost his life in the area. You know what I mean? And there's nothing that ties him there. And so that's where a lot of people come up with a bunch of random stuff. I think also the lack of a motive,
Yeah.
that people don't understand that sometimes unreasonable people do unreasonable things, and trying to come up with reason behind it doesn't work.
It's not motive when you have a fantasy about killing or something that's irrational, like you want to be known as someone that did something similar to, you want to be not known, you want to be responsible for a crime that's inspired by Ted Bundy or something like that. That's obviously not rational. Daniel, next Tuesday, I don't know if you got any doctor's appointments, but that's the next hearing on Karen Reed, and it stands to be explosive. The judge, I mean, sometimes we don't know, and we say that, but this one is going to be explosive. The judge paused the hearing, said grave concerns for the defense team, and it's already scheduled for next Tuesday. It says on the list they're going to go over what happened yesterday, and so the repercussions. So this really stands to be a historic hearing. So you're welcome to join me. You always are. But if you don't have any doctor's appointments, I don't know what yesterday's hearing started at 11, but usually they start at 9. So I'll let you know when I find out more, and I'll send you the link.
Yeah, Tuesdays are usually my wound day, but I usually get home before the trial ends. So as long as I can get home before that, I can jump on there with you. I tune in every time while I'm there. I think the doctors are, the nurses and the doctor there, they know who you are at this time.
They're sitting there. When I went for one of my own doctor's appointments, I was getting blood drawn last year during the trial, and I had it on my phone on my own channel. I just left it going, streaming. But I wasn't there, obviously, and the phlebotomist said, "Oh, is that the Karen Reed case?" And she started going over information about it, but she didn't know who I was, thank God, because they usually hate me.
Yeah.
It's most, like 95% of them are free Karen Reed. And so I'm like, if they know who I am, I'm the enemy,
Yeah.
But I also wanted to just say thank you for having me on, but also want to thank the moderators. My moderator that's here today, Joe, is great. And your moderators, I've been looking at chat, do a fantastic job. Sirius Black, and was there someone named Fulton? Did I get that right?
Afton for it.
And Extreme Blonde. Extreme Blonde pointed out, I'm sorry, Afton. And Extreme Blonde pointed out that I was mistaken. It was not a vacuum bag. It was a vacuum cleaner that Dylan thought he had in his hand. So I have been paying attention. I just want to say they do great. Thank you. And I appreciate it. So everybody, thanks for being here. And thank you, Daniel, for having me here.
Thank you so much, Kevin. You got everybody go check out the Yellow Cottage Tales. You won't be disappointed. It does a lot of great work on the Karen Reed case. I'll try to get out there on Tuesday to check that out with you. But everybody go check out his channel, and thank you again for tuning in.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you. All right, guys, I'm going to do a quick deal here on the documents that were dropped. I'm probably going to go in a little bit, later on this week, maybe tomorrow or the next day, and kind of go over all of them. I wasn't going to go through all of them already. I was just going to kind of touch on a few of them. And I touched on quite a bit earlier throughout this conversation about what they had. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that, so Frank's hearing, everything that comes with Brian Kohberger's case has been dropped, thrown out, not going to happen. It's time to go to trial, time to face the music. It is, it's the beginning of the end, in my opinion, for Mr. Kohberger. So everything is staying in, the DNA across the board. I told you guys from a long time ago what they were trying to do. I have called almost everything out in this case. I told you guys when did the FBI notify, or when did Moscow find out about who Brian Kohberger's name was? I said December 19th, and this document, December 19th. I told you this, guys, years ago. I told you guys about the fact that the defense was going to argue that the prosecution lied. They lied. They said that the way that they got to Brian Kohberger was through a WSU officer. It was not through, the random chance of, it was not through that random chance with a WSU officer. It was through the IGG. And they lied. They didn't disclose that. All that thrown out. Again, like I told you guys, that it was going to get thrown out. I knew what the defense was trying to do for years, and it ended up coming out to be in the case. A couple of things that we did learn, as I mentioned before, about the dog. We learned that the dog may have gone outside, and that The defense is going to argue that somebody took the dog outside. That is what their argument is going to be. But in reality, what ended up happening is, as I mentioned before, years ago, and yes, maybe I had a little birdie tell me that that was what was thought of. And, well, I asked the question if it was left open, and I was told something that would make me believe that it was. But this proves that it was. And with what they said earlier, as far as what this document states, as that DM said that she heard Murphy running down the stairs with who she thought was Kaylee, or who was Kaylee, right? And obviously law enforcement thinks that it was Xana, because at that time Kaylee was unfortunately no longer alive. And so we're left with the question, like, all right, so the dog's in the bedroom, dog's outside. Now, did somebody take the dog outside, or did the dog go outside because the black sliding glass door was left open? And if it was left open and the door was open when police got there, then obviously it ran back in at some point. Whew. It really does kind of clear up everything that happened that night to a certain extent. I mean, we don't know the why. We just know that we can say that, all right, it sounds like when Xana heard something, went upstairs, yelled, "Somebody's here," ran downstairs. Murphy ran right along with her. Behind her was Brian Kohberger. Followed Xana, the dog. Murphy ran out and ran outside, started barking outside. I mean, I told you guys, he only opened the back sliding glass door one time, and they didn't touch it again. And that for him to have done that, that tells me, see, because all I knew was that the back sliding glass door may have been left open. And then I saw the clip with Chief Fry where he said that the door was open when they arrived. And in a different conference, when they're asked about the front door, he said he didn't know anything about it. And then there was a different time, I think it was closer to Christmas, because it was around the time I think he had like a Christmas parade thing that he was doing. And they asked him again about the front door, and he said he had no knowledge of the front door being open. But on 2 other occasions, he mentioned that the door was still open when officers arrived. So that told me right off the bat that the back sliding glass door was open, that he didn't close it behind him when he left. And so I was like, you know what, that makes sense. If it was open that time, me personally, I thought maybe it was because there had to have been something else, lack of evidence, which obviously there was a lot of lack of evidence, but maybe something else that showed that the reason why they didn't believe that he closed the sliding glass door. We found out why now. It's because the dog was barking outside. The dog ran down the stairs and then ran outside to bark. The dog can't open the back sliding glass door on its own. So that back sliding glass door was left open the entire time, which leads me to believe that's the reason, may have been one of the reasons why Xana got up to begin with. Felt the draft of the door. It was a cold night. Walks out, walks upstairs, hears something, says, "I think someone's here." You know, the only thing I didn't have in my theory of what occurred, and I made this theory years ago, guys, years ago. The only thing I didn't know is that you know, obviously, was that Murphy ran down the stairs with Xana. I wasn't aware of that. Interesting stuff. No bloody footprints. Well, there was one apparently. I don't understand that. I'll be honest with you. I don't get it. You know, the one footprint. I don't know. I'm hoping there's some photos of the scene, not of the victims. That's not for anybody else to see, right? But I'm hoping that we do see what this footprint is. I'm sure we're going to see that in trial. And I'm hoping they're going to show, like, if there was some other footprints that are around it. But it sounds like there was only one. And I'm not sure if that's going to be enough to say that that was from that night or not. But it doesn't mean that Brian Kohberger didn't commit the crime, right? Like, so let's just say that they go in there and they check that bloody footprint and it comes back to be a year old. You know, somebody had a massive bloody nose or something and stepped in some blood as they ran and didn't clean it properly. right? Let's just say, let's benefit of the doubt. How the hell does that say that Brian Kohberger wasn't the guy? It's not exculpatory. And that's one of the things that continually happens in here, is that there isn't stuff that's exculpatory here. Let's see. I'm just going to kind of scan through this and I'm going to go through all this in more depth probably this weekend. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it all in one sitting anyways. So let me go through the green stuff, because the green stuff that I highlighted was really important. Then we'll call it a show. So this says here that the Amazon subpoena and search warrant, at some point in the investigation, the FBI located an Amazon account associated with the defendant. Okay, it served as a federal grand jury subpoena upon Amazon Inc. So at this some point that they located this account, kind of talks about how this was found separately, right? Like, I think that this is, to me, this sounds like a separate Amazon account than is normal use. Because it seems like they had to locate it. It wasn't like, I don't know. The way this reads off is just like a secret Amazon account that was found, but it doesn't. That's not what it says. It's just kind of the way it reads off to me. It was served as a federal grand jury subpoena upon Amazon Inc. seeking order history records. Amazon responded by providing the FBI and the defendant's Amazon subscription information purchase history from January 1st, 2022 to December 13, 2022. After receiving this information, Detective Maury applied for and received a search warrant for the records retained by Amazon for the defendant's account regarding customer click activity. Details of these items added or deleted from his cart. All suggestions made to the account, advertising data, device identification information, and linked accounts, and date range March 20th through March 30th, 2022, and November 1st, November 2022 through December 6th, 2022. So let's see. Just want to make sure I touch a couple of things real quick. Because like I said, there was a lot of it that was pretty, I was like, wow. I'm not sure if these are the two. So let me see. Oh, no, I think it's the other ones, the FRANKS one, where it showed everything that was being thrown out. Yeah, it's the other one. The 38 page. Give me a second. All right. But yeah, no, I'll go through that one, I guess, next time. I closed it out on myself by accident. My bad, guys. But a lot of stuff that came out, I've talked about for a while. Everything thrown out, including the FRANKS motion. The IGG was the other thing, too, that was interesting, right? So the IGG came back. They, like, when they described Brian Kohberger, what he was wearing, what he was doing, when they arrested him, it was interesting. This was an interesting read. We're going to go through a lot more of it. I promise you guys. We went through quite a bit of it. We just didn't go through it like step by step. I just kind of talked it out with Kevin. But I'm going to go through it probably, what's today? Thursday, it's Wednesday, probably Friday night. So make sure you guys like and subscribe. Let me see if I have any questions real fast that I want to answer. Sirius comes in with a $5 super chat saying, another great night with my turkey fam and our friends from the cottage. You both were excellent tonight. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I appreciate those that are tuning in from the Yellow Cottage Tales. Thank you guys. Thank you everybody that tuned in. I will be on Friday night and we'll talk more about this and go over everything else in higher detail. What? We got Angel D in the house. What's going on, Angel? Welcome back. 21 months. 21 months. Thank you for being here. I got something I got to take care of with that, though, real quick. Again, everybody, y'all have a great night. We'll be back on Friday night. Anybody have any questions before I let everybody go? I know that I didn't get a chance to look too much into the chat there. There we go. All righty, guys. Well, you guys have yourselves a great night, and we'll see you guys next time.